An intern? This is a joke. The words slice through the courtroom before Jasmine Carter even reaches the podium, and the laughter that follows is quiet at first, then contagious, echoing off the polished wood panels and marble floors like it belongs there, like she doesn't. Jasmine feels it in her chest, that familiar tightening, the same one she felt the first night she studied law under a flickering bus stop light, the same one that told her she didn't belong in rooms like this, rooms where suits cost more than her entire semester's tuition, rooms where people like her were seen, but never heard. But today, something is different. Today, $600 million hangs in the air like a storm about to break, and the man who was supposed to defend it isn't here. The judge glances at the empty chair reserved for the billionaire's lead attorney, his patience thinning by the second. Counsel is absent, he says, voice steady but sharp. Unless someone is prepared to proceed, I will have no choice but to dismiss. A murmur spreads through the room, a ripple of anticipation, because everyone knows what dismissal means. It means loss. It means headlines. It means the fall of Hawthorne Group. Jasmine's fingers tighten around the worn legal folder she's been carrying all morning, the edges soft from nights of rereading every page, every clause, every word that no one thought she needed to understand. She wasn't supposed to be here like this. She was supposed to observe, take notes, stay invisible. That's what interns do. That's what they told her on her first day, in that same tone that smiled without warmth. Stay quiet. Stay useful. Stay in your place. The opposing counsel, a tall man with a silver tie and a voice that carries without effort, leans back in his chair, clearly enjoying the moment. Your Honor, he says smoothly, if the defense is unprepared, we're ready to move forward. His eyes flick briefly toward Jasmine, then away, like she's not even part of the equation. Like she couldn't possibly change anything. Jasmine swallows, her heartbeat loud in her ears, louder than the whispers, louder than the ticking clock on the wall that seems to be counting down to something irreversible. She could sit down. She could let it happen. No one would blame her. She's just the intern. But then she remembers the nights, the long hours, the way her mother used to say, if you ever get a chance, even a small one, you take it. You don't wait for permission. Jasmine exhales slowly, steps forward, and before she can second-guess herself, her voice cuts through the room. Your Honor, I can proceed. The silence that follows is immediate, heavy, almost uncomfortable, like the room itself is deciding whether to take her seriously or laugh again. And then it happens. A chuckle. Then another. The same attorney shakes his head, barely hiding his amusement. You? He says, not even trying to lower his voice. You're an intern. Jasmine doesn't look at him. She keeps her eyes on the judge. Yes, sir, she says, her voice steadier now. But I've reviewed the case. The judge studies her, weighing something unseen, something that has nothing to do with her title and everything to do with the moment. You understand the stakes? He asks. $600 million. Jasmine nods. Yes, Your Honor. Another pause. Another breath held across the room. Then, finally, the judge leans back slightly. You have 10 minutes, he says. Convince me this case shouldn't be dismissed. 10 minutes. That's all. The room shifts again, but this time the laughter fades into curiosity, into something sharper. Jasmine steps up to the podium, her hands brushing against the cool surface, grounding her. She opens the folder, pages flipping with a soft, deliberate sound, and for a brief second, she feels the weight of every doubt that's ever been placed on her shoulders. Then she speaks. This case, she begins, her voice low but clear, is not about numbers. It's about a contract that was never meant to be broken. The opposing counsel smirks, already preparing his response, already certain of how this will end. But Jasmine keeps going, each word more certain than the last, each sentence building on something deeper than confidence. It's preparation. It's truth. It's everything no one expected from her. In the back of the courtroom, unnoticed by most, a man steps quietly into the shadows near the last row, his presence subtle but unmistakable to those who recognize power when they see it. William Hawthorne. He says nothing. He simply watches. And for the first time since Jasmine stood up, someone in that room isn't underestimating her. The clock on the wall ticks louder now. 10 minutes. 9:58. 9:57. And somewhere between the doubt and the silence, The laughter disappears completely, replaced by something no one anticipated. Attention. Jasmine feels the room lean in before she even finishes her first sentence. Like the air itself has shifted, like something invisible has tilted the balance just enough to make people listen instead of dismiss. And she does not waste it. She cannot afford to, because 10 minutes is not time. It is a countdown. It is pressure tightening around every word she chooses, every pause she allows, every breath she takes. And she knows one mistake will send everything crashing back into laughter, into doubt, into the easy narrative that she never belonged here in the first place. So she anchors herself in the only thing no one can take from her. The work she has done when no one was watching, the hours no one counted, the pages no one thought she understood, and she turns one page slowly, deliberately, letting the sound carry just enough to break the silence before she continues. The opposing counsel argues that Hawthorne Group violated Clause 12 of the acquisition agreement, she says. Her voice clearer now, stronger, not louder but steadier, and for the first time the judge's eyes narrow with focus instead of impatience. But that argument assumes the contract was executed under standard disclosure conditions, she adds, and now the attorney across from her straightens slightly, the smirk fading just a fraction, because this is no longer an intern reading notes. This is someone building an argument, and Jasmine sees it, that tiny shift, that almost invisible crack, and she steps into it. It was not, she says, and the words land differently, heavier, sharper, like they belong in the room, like she does, and a quiet murmur moves through the gallery seats, subtle but undeniable, and she keeps going, because stopping now would be losing. If you look at page 47, she says, lifting the contract slightly, not for effect, but because she has held this page so many times it feels like proof of something larger than the case. Clause 9 explicitly states that any material variance in disclosed assets must be acknowledged within 72 hours of filing. She pauses, just enough to let the words settle, just enough to force attention, then continues. That acknowledgement never happened. And now the opposing counsel leans forward, pen tapping once against the table, not casual anymore, not amused, and he interrupts. Your Honor, she is misinterpreting the clause, but Jasmine does not look at him. Not yet. She keeps her focus on the judge, because she understands something now that she did not when she walked in. Attention is power, and she has it for this moment. I am not, she says calmly, then finally turns her head slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time. You are ignoring subsection C. And the room stills again, deeper this time, because now it is not just about whether she belongs. It is about whether she is right. And that is a different kind of tension, the kind that changes outcomes, the kind that rewrites expectations. And she flips the page with precision, her fingers no longer trembling, her voice no longer searching. Subsection C outlines that failure to acknowledge variance voids the enforcement of Clause 12 under contested conditions. She says, each word measured, each phrase intentional. And now even the judge leans forward slightly, his earlier impatience replaced by something closer to curiosity, something closer to engagement, and Jasmine feels it. That shift, that moment where doubt begins to turn into possibility, and she presses further, because she knows this is where cases are won, not in volume, but in clarity, not in authority, but in truth, which means, she continues, her voice cutting clean through the silence. This case should not be dismissed because the claim itself is built on an unenforceable condition. And for a second, no one moves, no one speaks, the entire room suspended between disbelief and realization. And then the opposing counsel exhales sharply, a sound that carries more weight than any objection, because it is not confidence anymore. It is calculation. It is the sound of someone reassessing the ground beneath their feet. And Jasmine sees it. She feels it. And something inside her settles, something that has been waiting for this exact moment, this exact proof that she is not here by accident, that she is not standing at this podium by mistake. And in the back of the room, William Hawthorne shifts slightly in his seat, his gaze fixed entirely on her now, no distraction, no distance, just focus, the kind reserved for moments that matter, and Jasmine does not know he is there, not yet. But she feels something change anyway. Something intangible but real, like the room itself has decided to hear her. and the clock continues to tick. 9 minutes now. Maybe less. But time no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like momentum, and she takes one small breath, steady, controlled, and adds. And if the foundation of the claim does not stand, then neither does the demand for damages. And this time, when the silence falls, it is not uncertain, it is charged, it is alive, and no one laughs. The silence does not break immediately. It stretches, thick and deliberate, like the entire courtroom is holding its breath, waiting for someone to challenge her, to tear apart what she just said, to remind her where she stands. But no one does, not right away. And that is when Jasmine understands something deeper than any rule she memorized. Truth has a sound when it lands, and right now it is louder than any objection, louder than any title, louder than the quiet bias that walked into this room with her. And she lets that silence work, lets it settle into every corner, every polished surface, every pair of eyes that once looked past her. And then the opposing counsel finally moves, slower this time, more careful, his confidence no longer effortless but constructed. "Your Honor," he begins, adjusting his jacket as if buying time. The defense is attempting to distract from the central issue, but his voice does not carry the same weight it did before. There is a hesitation now, a slight narrowing of certainty, and Jasmine sees it. She does not interrupt. She waits, because she has learned something else in this moment. Power is not just in speaking. It is in knowing when to let the other side reveal their weakness. And when he finishes, she responds, not louder, not sharper, but cleaner. "There is no distraction," she says, turning a single page again. Only context, and the judge's gaze shifts between them, measuring, comparing, and for the first time since this began, Jasmine is not being measured as less. She is being measured equally, and that changes everything. "Proceed," the judge says, his tone no longer impatient but engaged, and Jasmine nods once, grounding herself again in the structure she built over countless nights. "If Clause 12 cannot be enforced," she continues, "then the demand for $600 million in damages has no legal standing under federal contract law." And now the words do more than fill the room. They redirect it. They move it, like a current changing direction beneath the surface, and a quiet shuffle moves through the gallery as people adjust in their seats, no longer relaxed, no longer certain of how this will end. And Jasmine takes one step closer to the podium, not physically but in presence, in control. However, she adds, and that single word draws every eye back to her. There is more. And now even the opposing counsel does not interrupt, because he senses it too. Something is coming, something he did not account for. And Jasmine's fingers rest briefly on the page she has been waiting to reach, the one she almost missed weeks ago when exhaustion blurred the lines and doubt whispered that she was wasting her time reading details no one asked her to read. And she remembers that moment now, standing here, and she realizes it was never wasted. It was preparation. It was purpose waiting for pressure. "The acquisition timeline submitted by the plaintiff," she says, lifting a second document from her folder, "does not match the disclosure record filed 72 hours prior." And this time the reaction is immediate, not loud, but sharp, like a shift in gravity, and the opposing counsel straightens fully now, no trace of amusement left. "That is not relevant," he says quickly, too quickly, and Jasmine finally meets his eyes again, steady, unwavering. "It is," she replies, "because the discrepancy indicates the assets in question were already under review before the alleged breach." And now the judge leans forward more noticeably, his interest no longer subtle. "Explain," he says, and Jasmine does, every word placed with intention, every detail connected. "If the assets were under review," she continues, "then the plaintiff cannot claim unforeseen loss, which means the basis for damages is not just unenforceable, it is invalid." And the word hangs there, invalid, heavier than anything she has said so far, and the room reacts, not with noise, but with attention sharpened to its edge, and Jasmine feels it again, that shift, stronger now, undeniable, the moment when doubt does not just fade, it disappears, replaced by recognition. And in the back row, William Hawthorne's expression changes, not visibly to most, but enough, to show that what he is witnessing is not luck, not coincidence. but something rare, something earned, and Jasmine does not see him, but she feels the weight of being seen anyway, not as an intern, not as an afterthought, but as someone who belongs exactly where she is standing, and the clock continues its quiet count. 8 minutes now, maybe less, but time has become something else entirely, not a limit, but a path she is moving through, step by step, argument by argument, and when she pauses. This time, it is not from uncertainty, it is from control, because she knows what comes next will decide everything, not just the case, but how this room remembers her, and she lifts her eyes to the judge once more and says, "Your Honor, the claim is not just weak, it is structurally unsound." And the words land with a finality that no one expected when she first stood up, not even her. The word unsound does not fade. It echoes, not in noise but in the way people shift in their seats, in the way pens stop moving, in the way the opposing counsel's expression tightens just enough to betray what he is thinking. Because this is no longer about dismissing an intern, this is about defending a position that is beginning to crack, and Jasmine sees it. She feels it. And for the first time since she stood up, she allows herself to take control not just of the argument, but of the pace. "If the court allows," she says, her voice calm, measured, no trace of hesitation left, "I would like to walk through the timeline submitted by the plaintiff." And the judge nods. A small motion, but one that carries authority, permission, and something else now, trust, and Jasmine turns slightly, angling her body just enough to face both the bench and the opposing side, positioning herself not as someone asking to be heard, but as someone who is being listened to. The plaintiff claims that the breach occurred on March 3rd at approximately 9:30 in the morning. She begins, her tone steady, almost conversational, but every word placed with precision. However, the internal review of the assets in question began on March 1st at 8:15 in the evening. She lifts the document slightly, not for show but for clarity. That review was acknowledged by both parties through preliminary disclosure filings. And now the opposing counsel moves again, quicker this time. Preliminary filings do not constitute formal acknowledgement. He interjects, but his voice lacks the earlier ease, and Jasmine does not rush to respond. She lets the interruption hang for just a second before answering. "They do when accompanied by signed variance notices," she says, and then she places the document down on the podium with a soft, deliberate motion, which are included in Exhibit 4. And the clerk, who had been barely paying attention at the beginning of this, now looks up, flipping through the materials, confirming what she has just said, and that confirmation, quiet as it is, lands harder than any argument, because it is not opinion, it is fact, and the judge glances briefly toward the clerk, then back to Jasmine, his expression no longer neutral but engaged. And Jasmine continues, "Because momentum now is everything. If both parties were aware of the variance before the alleged breach," she says, her voice gaining a subtle strength, not louder but more certain, "then the claim of unexpected loss does not hold." And now the opposing counsel exhales slowly, his hand resting on the table, fingers tapping once, twice, a rhythm that signals calculation, not confidence, and Jasmine recognizes it. She has seen it before, not in courtrooms, but in classrooms. In conversations where people underestimated her until they realized they could not. And she presses forward. "And if the loss was not unexpected," she adds, "then the demand for $600 million is not just unsupported, it is exaggerated." And this time the word lands differently, because it challenges not just the structure of the case, but its intent, and the room reacts, a subtle shift, a collective realization that what seemed like a straightforward claim is now something far more fragile. And Jasmine feels the weight of it, the turning point, the moment where everything begins to tilt in her favor, and she knows she cannot hesitate now, not even for a second, because this is where cases are decided, not in the beginning, not in the end, but in the middle where truth either holds or collapses. And she takes one small breath, steady, controlled, and continues, "Furthermore," she says, and the word draws every eye back to her again. The plaintiff's own timeline contradicts their claim of damages. And now even the opposing counsel does not interrupt immediately, because he knows, somewhere beneath his composure, that she has found something he did not expect her to find, and Jasmine lifts another page. one she marked late one night when exhaustion nearly made her overlook it. And she remembers that moment now, standing here, realizing that every detail she almost dismissed is now the reason she is still speaking. On March 2nd, she says, the plaintiff initiated a secondary evaluation of the same assets, indicating prior awareness of potential variance. She pauses, just enough to let the implication settle, then adds, which means the claimed damages were already anticipated. And now the silence that follows is not uncertain. It is heavy, decisive, the kind of silence that signals a shift in outcome. And the judge leans forward slightly more, his interest no longer hidden, his attention fully on her. And in the back of the room, William Hawthorne's gaze does not move, does not waver, because he understands what is happening. He understands that this is not just an argument. This is a transformation unfolding in real time. And Jasmine, still unaware of his presence, feels something change again, something deeper than validation, something closer to belonging. And the clock continues to tick, 7 minutes now, maybe less, but time has become secondary to momentum, to clarity, to the undeniable fact that the room is no longer questioning whether she should be there. It is waiting to hear what she will say next, and Jasmine meets the judge's eyes once more and says, Your Honor, the evidence does not support the claim, it dismantles it. And this time, no one even considers laughing. The word dismantles does not just linger. It settles into the room like something final, something that cannot be easily undone. And for a moment no one speaks, not the opposing counsel, not the clerk, not even the faint whispers from the gallery, because what Jasmine has done is no longer subtle. It is visible, undeniable, and the weight of it presses against every expectation that walked into this courtroom before her. And she feels it, not as pressure this time, but as clarity, as control. As the realization that she is not trying to prove herself anymore. She is proving the case, and that distinction changes the way she stands, the way she breathes, the way she continues. Your Honor, she says, her voice calm, but carrying further now, reaching the back of the room without effort. There is one final point that must be addressed, and the judge nods slightly, giving her the space, the permission, the attention that once felt impossible. And Jasmine turns one last page, the sound soft but decisive, like the closing movement of something carefully built. The plaintiff's valuation of damages, she continues, is based on projected loss tied to assets they claim were compromised after the alleged breach. She pauses, just long enough to let the structure of that claim settle in the air, then adds, but those projections rely on data that was revised before the breach was ever formally declared. And now the opposing counsel's pen stops tapping entirely, his posture tightening in a way that no longer hides concern, and Jasmine sees it. She recognizes it, not as victory yet, but as the final opening, the last place where truth can enter, without resistance, which means, she says, her tone sharpening just slightly, not aggressive but precise. The claimed $600 million is not a reaction to loss. It is an inflation of expectation. And the word inflation lands with a quiet force, because it reframes everything. It shifts the narrative from harm to exaggeration, from victim to strategist, and the room absorbs it, slowly but completely. And the judge leans back for a brief second, considering, weighing, not just the argument, but the pattern that has emerged. And Jasmine does not interrupt that process. She lets it happen, because she understands now that persuasion is not about speed. It is about inevitability, about building something so clear that the conclusion feels like the only possible outcome. And after a moment, the judge leans forward again, his gaze steady on her. Are you stating that the damages are speculative? He asks, and Jasmine meets his eyes without hesitation. Yes, Your Honor, she replies. And more than that, they are unsupported by the plaintiff's own timeline and documentation. And there is a shift in the room again, deeper this time. More final, as if something invisible has locked into place, and the opposing counsel exhales slowly, his shoulders lowering just enough to signal what he cannot say out loud, that the ground beneath his case has moved, and Jasmine feels it fully now, not as a question, not as a possibility, but as a certainty. She has crossed the line from doubt into authority, and she takes one final breath, steady, controlled, and delivers the sentence that brings everything together. Your Honor, when the contract is read in full context, when the timeline is aligned with the evidence, and when the projections are examined against documented awareness, there is no legal basis for this claim to proceed. And this time, when the silence falls, it is complete, not waiting, not questioning, but resolved, and the judge's expression reflects it. Thoughtful, measured, but no longer uncertain. And in the back of the room, William Hawthorne allows himself the smallest shift, not visible to most, but meaningful, because what he has just witnessed is not luck, not coincidence, but preparation meeting opportunity in a way that cannot be taught, only earned. And Jasmine, still unaware of his presence, stands there with her hands resting lightly on the podium, no longer gripping it, no longer needing it for balance, because she has found something else entirely, something stronger, something that does not come from titles or positions, but from knowing that she has done the work, that she has seen what others overlooked, that she has spoken when it mattered most. And the clock continues to tick, 6 minutes now, maybe less, but time no longer defines this moment. The room does, the silence does, the undeniable shift in perception does, and when the judge finally speaks, his voice steady, deliberate, it carries a weight that confirms everything Jasmine has built. The court will take this under consideration, he says, and while it is not yet a final verdict, it is something just as powerful. It is acknowledgement, it is recognition, it is the first official step toward a decision that no one in this room expected when she first stood up, and Jasmine nods once, not in relief, not in triumph, but in understanding, because she knows something. Now that she did not know before, she did not just save a case, she changed the way this room sees her. And that is only the beginning. The courtroom does not return to normal after the judge's words. It lingers in that suspended state where something important has already shifted but has not yet been officially declared, and Jasmine feels it in the way people are no longer looking past her but directly at her, not with curiosity anymore, but with recognition, and it is unfamiliar in a way that almost feels heavier than the doubt she walked in with, because now there is expectation attached to it. Now there is consequence, and she remains still at the podium for a brief moment, allowing the weight of what just happened to settle without letting it overwhelm her, because she knows this is not over. Not yet, and across the room the opposing counsel gathers his papers. With a slower, more deliberate motion than before, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet urgency, and when he finally stands, there is no smirk, no casual ease, only focus. Your Honor, he says, his voice controlled but tighter now. The defense's argument relies heavily on interpretation, and the word interpretation hangs there as if it could undo everything Jasmine has built, as if it could reduce her clarity back into something uncertain, something debatable, and for a brief second, the room shifts again, not backward, but sideways, into that space where outcomes are still being decided, and Jasmine feels it, that subtle pull, that reminder that one strong argument does not end a case. It invites the next challenge, and she does not move, does not interrupt. She listens, because she understands now that listening is part of control, and the attorney continues. The plaintiff maintains that the variance acknowledgement does not invalidate the breach, only adjusts the scope of liability. And there is a rhythm to his words now, a regained structure, not as strong as before but still present, and Jasmine knows this is his attempt to rebuild, to reclaim ground, to remind the court that this is still a contest, and the judge nods slightly, considering, then turns his gaze back to Jasmine. Your response, he asks, and it is simple, direct, placing the weight of the moment back into her hands. And Jasmine inhales once, steady, grounding herself not in the pressure but in the work, in the hours that led here, in the quiet certainty that does not need to be loud to be strong. And she steps forward just slightly, enough to signal she is ready, enough to hold the room again. Your Honor, she begins, her voice even, unwavering. The issue is not interpretation, and the words land clearly, cutting through the attempt to blur the argument. It is consistency, and now the judge's expression sharpens again, because this is a different angle, a different path, and Jasmine continues, building carefully. The plaintiff cannot claim both awareness and surprise within the same timeline, she says, and the logic is simple, almost obvious, but that is what gives it strength, because once it is seen, it cannot be unseen. And she lets that sit for a moment before adding, if they acknowledged the variance before the breach, then the breach cannot be the source of the loss they are claiming. And now the room shifts again, not dramatically, but decisively, like a door closing quietly but firmly, and the opposing counsel's posture tightens once more, his attempt to reframe beginning to unravel under the clarity of her response. And Jasmine feels it, that second turning point. The moment where not just one argument, but the entire structure of the opposing case begins to lose its footing, and she does not rush. She does not press too hard. She lets the logic carry itself, because she knows now that the strongest arguments do not need force, they need precision. And in the back of the room, William Hawthorne's gaze remains fixed, but there is something new in it now. Not just attention, not just interest, but recognition of something rare, something that cannot be manufactured or taught. The ability to see what others overlook and speak it when it matters most. And Jasmine, still unaware of him, continues, her presence now fully aligned with her purpose. Furthermore, she adds, her tone steady but carrying a quiet finality. Adjusting liability does not eliminate the requirement for a valid claim, and the words land with the kind of weight that does not need repetition, because they close the gap the opposing counsel tried to open. They seal it, and the silence that follows is not fragile, it is firm, it holds. And the judge leans back slightly, his fingers resting together as he considers the exchange, not as a comparison anymore, but as a progression, a movement towards something clearer, something more defined. And Jasmine stands there without shifting, without fidgeting, without looking away, because she understands now that this moment is not about proving herself again. It is about holding what she has already established, and the clock continues to tick. 5 minutes now, maybe less, but time has become something else entirely. Not a limit, but a measure of how far she has come in such a short span. And when the judge finally speaks again, his voice calm, but carrying a subtle weight of conclusion, it confirms what the room has already begun to accept. The court recognizes the inconsistency in the plaintiff's position, he says, and though it is not yet the final ruling, it is something just as significant. It is validation. It is acknowledgement that the foundation of the case has shifted, and Jasmine feels it fully now, not as relief, not as triumph, but as certainty, the kind that does not need to be announced because it is already understood. And for the first time since she stood up, she allows herself the smallest exhale, controlled, quiet, but real, because she knows, even before the final words are spoken, that everything has changed. The acknowledgement from the judge does not end the tension, it transforms it, because now the question is no longer whether Jasmine's argument holds, it is whether anything remains strong enough to stand against it. And the room feels that shift in a way that is almost physical, like the air itself has grown heavier with expectation, and Jasmine remains steady at the podium, not moving, not speaking, because she understands that this moment does not require more words, it requires presence. And across from her the opposing counsel hesitates, just for a fraction of a second, but it is enough to show that the rhythm he relied on earlier has broken, enough to show that he is now reacting instead of leading. And he clears his throat, straightens his posture, trying to reclaim something that is already slipping. Your Honor, he begins again, but this time the confidence is measured, controlled. Even if the court finds inconsistency, that does not eliminate the contractual obligation. And the argument sounds structured, logical on the surface, but it lacks the sharpness it once had, it lacks the certainty, and Jasmine hears it. She recognizes it, not as a threat, but as an echo of what used to be stronger, and she does not rush to respond. She allows the words to settle, to be fully heard, because she knows now that clarity grows stronger when it is contrasted. And when the judge turns to her again, there is no hesitation in his gaze, only expectation, only readiness. Miss Carter, he says, and the use of her name, not her position, not her role, lands with a quiet significance that ripples through the room. Your response. And Jasmine nods once, grounding herself not in the recognition but in the responsibility that comes with it. And she speaks, her voice calm, precise, carrying the weight of everything she has already established. Your Honor, contractual obligation requires a valid foundation, she says, and the words connect immediately to what has already been proven, building forward instead of repeating. If the foundation is inconsistent, then the obligation cannot be enforced as presented, and she pauses, not out of uncertainty, but to allow the logic to settle, to become undeniable, and the judge's expression shifts slightly, not in surprise, but in agreement forming beneath the surface. And Jasmine continues, because she knows this is the final stretch, the place where everything either holds or falls. The plaintiff's argument depends on a sequence of events that does not align with their own documentation. She adds, her tone steady but carrying a quiet finality. And without that alignment, the claim does not meet the standard required for enforcement. And now the room does not just listen, it absorbs, it processes, it begins to accept. And the opposing counsel's hands rest flat against the table, no longer moving, no longer tapping, because there is nothing left to adjust, nothing left to reframe. And Jasmine feels it fully now. The shift from contest to conclusion. The moment where the outcome is no longer uncertain but inevitable. And in the back of the room, William Hawthorne leans forward slightly, not because he needs to hear more, but because he recognizes the exact point where a moment becomes something larger, where a single decision changes the trajectory of a life. And Jasmine, still unaware of him, stands with a presence that no longer feels borrowed, no longer feels temporary. It belongs to her now. It is earned, it is undeniable, and the clock continues to tick, for minutes now, maybe less, but time has become irrelevant, because what matters has already been established, and when the judge finally speaks again, his voice steady, deliberate, carrying the authority of a decision forming. It confirms what the room has already begun to understand. The court finds that the plaintiff's claim lacks sufficient consistency to proceed as filed. He says, and though it is not yet the final word, it is the turning point. It is the moment where everything shifts from possibility to reality, and Jasmine feels it not as a surge of emotion, but as a deep, quiet certainty, the kind that settles rather than explodes. And for the first time since she stood up, she allows herself to lower her hands slightly from the podium. Not because she needs to, but because she no longer needs to hold on to anything. The case is holding itself now, and as the judge prepares to continue, the room remains completely still, completely focused, because everyone understands that the next words will not just end a case. They will define a moment that no one expected to witness, least of all the intern who now stands at the center of it. The judge's words do not arrive with drama. They arrive with certainty, steady and deliberate, cutting through the silence in a way that leaves no room for interpretation. Accordingly, the claim for damages is dismissed, and for a brief second the room does not react, not because it does not understand, but because it does, completely, and that understanding settles like a wave that has reached its final point. $600 million no longer hanging in uncertainty, no longer balanced on absence or delay, but resolved, and Jasmine stands there, not moving, not speaking, because she feels it before she processes it. The shift from argument to outcome, the moment where everything she has built becomes real, and then the room begins to breathe again, subtle at first, a chair shifting, a quiet exhale, a page being closed, but beneath it all there is something else, something stronger, recognition, not loud, not announced, but present in every glance that now lands on her. Differently than before, and across the table the opposing counsel lowers his gaze briefly, gathering his materials with a controlled motion that no longer hides the result, no longer carries the assumption of victory, and Jasmine does not look at him. She keeps her focus forward, because she understands that this moment is not about them anymore. It is about what has just been established, what has just been proven. And the judge continues, his tone measured, final. The court finds that the plaintiff's position fails to meet the standard required for enforcement under the presented terms. And with that, the case is not just paused, not just reconsidered, it is decided, and the finality of it moves through the room like a quiet confirmation of everything that has unfolded in the last few minutes. And Jasmine feels something shift inside her, not a burst of emotion, not a sudden reaction, but a deep, steady realization. She did not just speak, she changed the outcome, and for a brief second she allows herself to breathe differently, to feel the weight of that without letting it overwhelm her. and then she steps back from the podium. Just one step, controlled, grounded, because she knows that what comes next matters just as much as what has already happened. And as she turns slightly, preparing to return to her place, she notices it. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet shift in the room's focus. A line of sight that does not follow the usual patterns, and she follows it, just for a second. Just enough to see him, standing near the back. No introduction, no announcement, but unmistakable. William Hawthorne, and the recognition is not loud. It is not sudden. It is a quiet understanding that settles into place, the kind that connects everything without needing explanation. And he is not clapping, not speaking, not moving toward her. He is simply watching. But the way he watches is different from everyone else in the room. It is not curiosity. It is not surprise. It is something deeper, something closer to evaluation, to acknowledgement, to seeing her not as she was when she stood up, but as she is now. And Jasmine holds that gaze for a brief second, just long enough to understand that this moment extends beyond the courtroom, beyond the case, beyond the immediate result. And then she looks away, not out of hesitation, but out of control, because she understands something now that she did not when she walked in. Recognition is not something you chase. It is something that follows when you do the work. And as she moves back toward her seat, the room continues to shift around her, people adjusting, voices beginning to rise again in quiet conversation. But none of it reaches her the same way, because she is still grounded in the moment that just passed, in the clarity of what she said, in the certainty of how it landed. And the clock on the wall continues to tick, but it no longer feels like a countdown. It feels like continuation, like something has started that will not stop here. And behind her, William Hawthorne finally moves, just one step forward, then another, not rushed, not dramatic, but intentional. And though she does not turn back, Jasmine feels it, that presence shifting closer, that moment extending beyond its original boundaries, and somewhere between the quiet conversations and the steady rhythm of footsteps, something new begins to form, not spoken yet, not defined, but inevitable, because moments like this do not end when the gavel falls, they begin. The courtroom does not empty immediately. It lingers in that quiet aftermath where conversations begin in low voices and glances carry more meaning than words. And Jasmine remains seated for a moment longer than necessary, her hands resting lightly in her lap, her posture composed but still, because something inside her is still catching up to what just happened, not the arguments, not the logic, but the shift, the undeniable transformation from being overlooked to being seen, and she feels it. In the way no one is dismissing her anymore, in the way even the smallest movements around her seem to acknowledge her presence differently, and she exhales slowly, controlled, grounding herself before she stands, because she knows that what comes next matters just as much as what already happened. And as she rises, she notices the space around her subtly parting, not dramatically, not intentionally, but enough to make a path, enough to signal recognition, and she steps forward, gathering her folder with the same care she held it earlier. But now it feels different, not like protection, not like preparation, but like something that has fulfilled its purpose. And as she turns toward the aisle, she sees him again, closer now, no longer at the back of the room but halfway between where he stood and where she is, William Hawthorne, and the distance between them is no longer just physical, it is filled with something unspoken, something that does not need introduction or explanation. Because both of them understand what just happened, not just the outcome, but the way it happened, the way it was earned, and for a brief second they stand there, facing each other without words. The room continuing around them but fading into something quieter, something less important, and then he speaks, his voice calm, measured, carrying the kind of authority that does not need volume to be heard. "You read everything," he says, not as a question but as a statement, and Jasmine meets his gaze, steady, unshaken. "Yes," she replies, her voice just as calm, just as controlled, and there is no need to explain further, no need to justify, because the answer is already in what he witnessed, and he studies her for a moment, not evaluating, not questioning, but recognizing. And then he nods once, a small motion but one that carries weight. "Most people do not," he says, and there is something in his tone, not criticism, not praise, but acknowledgement, and Jasmine holds that moment without shifting, because she understands now that this is not about impressing him. It is about standing in what she has already proven, and she responds simply, "That is why they miss things." And the words land quietly, but with clarity, and for the first time a subtle change appears in his expression, not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to show that he did not expect that answer, not in content, but in confidence. And he takes one step closer, closing the remaining distance between them just slightly, not intruding, but engaging. "What is your name?" he asks, and the question is simple, but it carries significance, because it is no longer about her role, no longer about her position, it is about her. And Jasmine answers without hesitation, "Jasmine Carter." And the name settles between them, no longer anonymous, no longer attached to a title that diminishes it. And he repeats it once, quietly, as if placing it into memory, "Jasmine Carter." And then he looks at her again, more directly now. "You were not supposed to be the one standing there today," he says. And the statement could carry many meanings, doubt, surprise, even disbelief. But the way he says it is different. It is not about what she was not supposed to be. It is about what she became anyway. And Jasmine nods slightly, not disagreeing, not explaining, simply acknowledging the truth of it. And for a moment neither of them speaks, because the moment does not require more words, it requires understanding, and around them the courtroom continues to shift. Back into motion, people leaving, conversations growing louder, but between them there is stillness, a pause that feels intentional. And then he speaks again, his tone just as measured, but now carrying something new, direction. "Come by my office tomorrow," he says, and it is not phrased as a request, not presented as an opportunity to consider. It is an invitation with weight, with implication, with a future attached to it. And Jasmine feels it immediately, not as pressure, not as uncertainty, but as possibility. And she does not respond right away, not because she is unsure, but because she understands the significance of what is being offered, the shift it represents, the door it opens. And when she does speak, her voice remains steady, unchanged by the magnitude of the moment. "I will," she says, and there is no hesitation in it, no doubt, just the same clarity that carried her through the courtroom. And he nods once more, satisfied, not because she agreed, but because of how she did. And then, without another word, he turns, moving toward the exit with the same quiet confidence he carried when he entered, leaving behind not just the case, not just the result, but a moment that has already begun to extend beyond itself. And Jasmine stands there for a second longer, watching him go, not with awe, not with disbelief, but with understanding. Because she knows now that this was never just about saving a case. It was about being ready when the moment came. And as she turns to leave the courtroom, stepping into the hallway where the noise returns and the world continues, she carries something different with her, not just recognition, not just opportunity, but certainty, the kind that does not fade when the moment ends, because it has already become part of who she is. The hallway outside the courtroom feels louder than it should, voices overlapping, footsteps echoing against polished floors. But Jasmine walks through it with a kind of quiet focus that separates her from the noise, because even though everything around her has returned to motion, something inside her has slowed, settled, become steady in a way that does not match the rush of the crowd. And she holds her folder close, not out of habit now, but as a reminder, as something tangible that connects her to what just happened. And as she moves forward, she catches fragments of conversation, names, numbers, words like unbelievable and unexpected, but none of them reach her the way they might have before, because she understands something now that she did not before she walked into that courtroom. Validation from others is not what changed her. It is what she proved to herself that did. And she continues down the corridor, her steps measured, her posture unchanged, until she reaches the exit doors, and for a moment she pauses, her hand resting lightly on the handle, because stepping outside means leaving the moment behind. Not entirely, but enough that it becomes something she carries instead of something she stands inside. And she exhales once, steady, then pushes the door open, and the city greets her with a different kind of noise, distant traffic, the hum of life continuing without pause, without awareness of what just happened inside those walls. And she steps onto the sidewalk, the air cooler, sharper, grounding in a different way, and she stands there for a second, letting it settle, letting the transition happen. And then she starts walking, not toward anything specific, just forward, because that is what she has always done. Moving forward even when the path was unclear, even when the direction was uncertain. And as she walks, her mind does not replay the courtroom in detail. It does not focus on the exact words or the exact moments. It holds on to something simpler, something more essential, the feeling of knowing she was right and choosing to speak anyway. And that feeling stays with her as she turns onto the next street, passing people who do not know her, who do not recognize what just happened. And there is something freeing in that, something grounding, because it reminds her that this moment, as significant as it is still part of a larger journey, not the end of it. And she reaches the corner where the bus stop stands, the same place she has stood so many nights before, the same flickering light above the bench casting a soft, uneven glow. And she pauses there, looking at it for a second longer than necessary, because this place holds a different version of her, one that sat with heavy books and heavier doubts, one that questioned whether she would ever be ready for something like today. And she allows herself to remember that version, not to dwell on it, but to acknowledge it, to recognize the distance between who she was then and who she is now. And it is not measured in time, not in months or years, but in moments, in decisions, in the choice to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. And she sits down on the bench, the familiar surface grounding her in a way nothing else can, and she looks down at her hands, the same hands that held the contract, that turned the pages, that stood steady when everything around her expected them to shake. And she flexes her fingers slightly, almost unconsciously, as if confirming that it really happened, that it was her, that she was the one standing there. And a faint smile touches her lips, not wide, not dramatic, but real, because this is not about celebration, it is about recognition. And as she sits there, the city continuing around her, the bus arriving in the distance, the light flickering above, she hears it again, not out loud, but in memory, her mother's voice, steady and certain. If you ever get a chance, you take it. And she nods slightly to herself, because now she understands what that really meant. It was never just about taking the chance. It was about being ready when it came, about doing the work long before the moment arrives. And she stands as the bus pulls up, stepping forward with the same calm certainty she carried into the courtroom. Because tomorrow is already waiting, the invitation already given, the next step already forming. And as she boards, taking a seat by the window, she looks out at the city passing by, not as something distant, not as something unreachable, but as something she is already part of. And somewhere across that city, in a building far different from the courtroom she just left, a door is waiting to be opened, not because of who she knows, not because of where she comes from, but because of what she proved. And Jasmine Carter leans back slightly in her seat, her reflection faint in the glass. And for the first time she does not see someone trying to belong. She sees someone who already does. The next morning does not arrive with drama. It arrives quietly, the way important days often do, with light filtering through the window, and the city already moving long before Jasmine steps outside. And she stands for a moment at the edge of the sidewalk, her bag resting against her shoulder, her mind clear in a way that feels unfamiliar, not because there is nothing to think about, but because everything she needs to carry into this day is already settled inside her. And she begins to walk, her steps steady, her pace unhurried, not because she is unsure, but because she understands that rushing would not change what is waiting for her. And as she moves through the city, past storefronts just opening and people already lost in their routines, she notices something subtle, something she would have missed before. The way the world does not shift to acknowledge individual moments. It continues, constant and indifferent, and yet within that movement, there are moments that change everything, and yesterday was one of them. Not because of the outcome alone, but because of who she became in it. And that thought stays with her as she approaches the building, tall, glass, reflecting the morning light in sharp lines that feel almost unreal. And she pauses at the entrance, looking up for a second, not in awe, not in hesitation, but in recognition. This is the place she was invited to, not by chance, not by connection, but by merit. And she steps inside, the doors opening smoothly, the air inside cooler, quieter, controlled in a way that contrasts sharply with the street outside. and immediately the difference is clear, the lobby expansive, polished floors reflecting every movement, the sound of footsteps softened but precise, and people moving with purpose, with direction, and for a brief second, the old instinct returns, the awareness of difference, of not fully belonging. But it does not hold the same weight anymore. It passes through her instead of stopping her, because she knows now that belonging is not granted by space. It is earned by presence, and she walks toward the front desk, her posture steady, her voice calm as she gives her name, Jasmine Carter. And the receptionist looks up, scanning a list, then nods. "You are expected," she says, and the words are simple, but they carry something that lands deeper than they should. Expected, not questioned, not doubted, expected, and Jasmine nods once in return, then follows the direction given. Moving toward the elevators, each step measured, each movement grounded, and as the doors close behind her and the elevator begins to rise, she watches the numbers change, each floor marking a transition, not just in height, but in context, in possibility, and she feels it, not as pressure, but as awareness, that this moment is different from the courtroom, not because it requires more, but because it requires something else. Consistency, presence beyond a single moment, and when the doors open. Again, the space is quieter, more focused, the kind of quiet that belongs to places where decisions are made before they are spoken, and she steps out, following the hallway until she reaches the office. The name on the door simple, unembellished, but unmistakable, William Hawthorne, and for a second she stands there, not hesitating, not questioning, just acknowledging the moment, and then she lifts her hand and knocks, once, firm but not loud, and the response comes almost immediately, "Come in," and she opens the door, stepping inside, and the office is exactly what it should be, expansive but not excessive, organized but not rigid, the kind of space that reflects control without needing to display it. And he is there, standing near the window, looking out at the city below, but when she enters, he turns, his attention shifting fully to her, and there is no surprise in his expression, no reassessment, only recognition, as if this meeting was never uncertain, only inevitable. "You are on time," he says, and it is not praise, not a test, just a statement, and Jasmine nods. "Yes," she replies, her voice steady, and he gestures toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." And she does, her movements controlled, her posture aligned with the same calm certainty she carried yesterday. And for a moment he does not speak. He simply looks at her, not evaluating, not measuring, but observing, and then he says, "Tell me something." And the words are direct, unfiltered. "When you stood up yesterday, what made you think you could win?" And the question hangs in the air, not as a challenge, but as an invitation to define something deeper, and Jasmine does not rush to answer. She takes a brief second, not to search for the right words, but to align them with the truth, and then she speaks. "I did not think about winning," she says, her tone calm, grounded. "I thought about being right." And the answer settles between them, simple, clear, and for the first time there is a visible shift in his expression, not surprise, but confirmation, as if something he suspected has just been proven, and he nods slightly. "That is rare," he says, and there is no exaggeration in it, no unnecessary weight, just recognition. And Jasmine meets his gaze without hesitation, because she understands now that this moment is not about proving herself again. It is about standing in what she has already shown, and the room remains quiet, not empty, but focused, because something important is beginning to take shape, not announced, not formalized, but real, and Jasmine Carter sits there, no longer the intern who was overlooked, but the one who stepped forward when it mattered, and everything that follows will be built on that. William Hawthorne does not respond immediately after her answer, and the silence that follows is not empty. It is deliberate, the kind of silence that measures not just what was said but how it was said, and Jasmine holds it without shifting, without filling it, because she understands now that not every moment requires words, some require presence, and he studies her for a second longer, then moves toward his desk, not hurried, not dramatic, but intentional, and he sits, his posture relaxed, but precise, the kind that suggests control without effort, and he gestures slightly toward the chair again, reinforcing the space she already occupies, not as a visitor, but as someone meant to be there. And then he speaks, his tone even, direct. Do you know why most cases like that are lost? And the question is not rhetorical. It is specific, it is pointed, and Jasmine considers it for a brief moment, not searching for what he wants to hear, but for what is true, because people assume the structure is correct, she says, her voice steady. And they argue within it instead of questioning it. And the answer lands cleanly, without excess, and he nods once, a small confirmation. Exactly, he says, and there is no emphasis, no dramatics, just alignment. And he leans back slightly, his gaze still on her. But now there is something else in it, something closer to decision than evaluation. What you did yesterday, he continues, was not just reading a contract. And he pauses, just long enough for the distinction to settle. You saw where it did not hold. And Jasmine listens without interrupting, because she understands that this is not praise, it is recognition of a skill, of a perspective that goes beyond the surface. And he continues, that is not something I can teach. And the words carry weight, not exaggerated, but clear, and for a moment the room feels even quieter, as if the statement has shifted something fundamental, and Jasmine does not react outwardly. She does not smile. She does not lean forward. She simply acknowledges it with a small nod, because she understands that what matters is not the statement itself, but what follows it. And he reaches toward a folder on his desk, sliding it slightly forward, not opening it yet, not presenting it fully, just placing it within reach. I do not need another intern, he says, his tone unchanged, but the meaning unmistakable, and Jasmine feels it, not as surprise, but as confirmation. Because she has already sensed this direction, already understood that this meeting is not about evaluation, it is about transition, and he continues, I need someone who sees what others miss and is willing to say it when it matters. And now the statement is complete, not framed as an offer, not softened as a possibility, but clear in its intent, and he opens the folder, turning it toward her, and inside are documents, structured, formal, the kind that define roles, responsibilities, expectations, but what they represent is more than that. They represent a shift, a movement from where she was to where she is being asked to go. And Jasmine looks at them, not rushing, not immediately reaching, because she understands that this moment is not about reacting. It is about choosing, and he watches her, not impatient, not pressing, simply observing, because he knows that the decision matters more if it is made with clarity. And after a second, she lifts her gaze back to him, meeting it steadily. What happens if I say no? She asks, and the question is not defensive, not uncertain. It is direct. It is grounded in the same clarity that carried her through the courtroom. And for the first time there is a faint shift in his expression, not surprise, but approval, because the question itself confirms something important, that she is not driven by the offer, but by understanding it. And he answers without hesitation. Then you walk out of here exactly as you walked in, he says, with nothing owed and nothing taken. And the simplicity of it removes any pressure, any hidden expectation, leaving only the decision itself. And Jasmine nods slightly, absorbing that, because it matters, because it confirms that what is being offered is not control, not obligation, but opportunity. And she looks back at the documents, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk, not yet moving, because she is not thinking about the position, not about the title, not even about the office or the building or the scale of what this represents. She is thinking about something simpler, something more fundamental, whether this path aligns with what she already knows about herself, about what she proved yesterday, about the way she approaches the work. And after a moment, she reaches forward, not hesitantly, not dramatically, just with quiet certainty, and she turns the first page, her eyes scanning the details, not skimming, not assuming, but reading, fully, carefully, the same way she read the contract, the same way she approaches everything that matters. And William Hawthorne watches her do it, not interrupting, not explaining, because this is the confirmation he needs, not the answer she will give, but the way she arrives at it. And the room remains still, not tense, not uncertain, but focused, because something important is being decided, not in words, but in understanding. And as Jasmine continues reading, the city beyond the window moves in its usual rhythm, unaware of what is taking shape inside this office. unaware that another moment is unfolding, one that will not be marked by a gavel or a verdict, but by a decision that carries just as much weight. And when she finally reaches the end of the first page, she pauses, not because she is unsure, but because she has already understood enough to know what this means, and she lifts her eyes to meet his again, not as someone being offered something, but as someone choosing whether to step into it, and the silence between them holds, steady, clear, because the next words will not define who she is, they will reflect it. The silence between them does not break quickly, it settles, steady and intentional, like both of them. Understand that this moment is not about speed, it is about clarity, and Jasmine holds the final page in place for just a second longer before she closes the folder gently, not with hesitation, not with uncertainty, but with a kind of quiet finality that signals she has seen enough, not just of the documents, but of what they represent, and she lifts her eyes to meet his again, her expression unchanged, composed, grounded, the same way it was in the courtroom, and when she speaks, her voice carries that same clarity. This is not just a position, she says, and the statement is simple, but it acknowledges something deeper, something that goes beyond titles or responsibilities, and he watches her without interrupting, because he knows that what she says next matters more than anything written in the folder, and she continues, it is responsibility, and the word lands with weight, not exaggerated, but understood, and for a brief second the room feels even quieter, as if the space itself is holding the meaning of that, and he nods slightly, not in agreement alone, but in recognition, because she has already framed the decision correctly, and that matters more than the decision itself, and Jasmine rests her hand lightly on the folder, not gripping it, not claiming it yet, but acknowledging its presence, its significance, and she speaks again, her tone steady, deliberate. I will not take it because of what happened yesterday, she says, and there is no defiance in it, no rejection, only clarity. I will take it because I can do the work, and the words settle between them, simple, direct, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And for the first time there is a visible shift in his expression, not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to show that something has aligned exactly as he expected, and he leans back slightly, the smallest release of tension that had been held beneath the surface. Good, he says, and the word is not praise, it is confirmation, and Jasmine reaches forward then, not hesitantly, not slowly, but with quiet certainty, and she picks up the pen resting beside the folder, the motion controlled, intentional, and she signs, not rushed, not decorative, just her name, Jasmine Carter, written clearly, firmly, the same way she stood, the same way she spoke, and when she finishes, she places the pen back down, aligning it with the same precision she applied to everything else, and she slides the folder slightly forward, not offering it, not presenting it, but completing the action, and for a moment neither of them speaks, because the decision has already been made, not just in ink, but in understanding, and then he stands, not abruptly, not dramatically, just with purpose, and she rises as well, matching his movement without hesitation, and he steps around the desk, closing the distance between them, not as someone above her, not as someone assessing her, but as someone acknowledging her as part of something now shared, and he extends his hand. Welcome, he says, and the word carries weight, not because of where it is spoken, but because of what it recognizes, and Jasmine takes his hand, her grip firm, steady, not trying to prove anything, not trying to match anything, just present, just equal, and for a second that handshake holds, not long, not symbolic, but real, and then they release, and the moment settles into something new, something established, and he turns slightly, gesturing toward the window, the city stretching out beyond it. Everything you saw yesterday, he says, that is only the beginning. And there is no warning in it, no pressure, just truth, and Jasmine follows his gaze for a brief second, looking out at the same city she moved through yesterday, the same streets, the same buildings, but it feels different now, not because it changed, but because she did, and she nods once, not in agreement, but in understanding, because she knows that what lies ahead will not be easier, it will not be simpler, but it will be hers, shaped by the same choices, the same discipline, the same willingness to see what others overlook, and after a moment she turns back, her posture steady, her expression unchanged, and he watches her for a second longer before speaking again. "Your first assignment will be waiting," he says, and there is no pause, no transition, just continuation, because in this world, moments do not linger. They build, they move forward, and Jasmine nods once more, not surprised, not overwhelmed, just ready, and she steps toward the door, not rushing, not hesitating, and as she reaches it, she pauses for a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly on the handle, not looking back, not needing to, because she understands something now that does not require confirmation. She belongs here not because she was invited, but because she earned it, and she opens the door, stepping into the hallway, the quiet hum of the building continuing around her, and as she walks forward, her steps steady, her presence aligned with everything she has become. The moment does not end, it expands, moving with her, shaping what comes next. And somewhere between the quiet hallway and the city beyond, Jasmine Carter is no longer becoming someone new. She is simply continuing as who she has already proven herself to be.